It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Centerville City Manager Wayne Davis. Wayne's a graduate of the University of Vermont and has his master's degree in public administration from Wright State University. He's also a graduate of the University of Virginia's Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service. Wayne began his professional career as a civilian in the United States Air Force working at the Pentagon. Since moving to Ohio 33 years ago, he also worked with the Montgomery County Office of Management and Budget and the Combined Health District. He was previously the finance director and city manager for the city of Montgomery near Cincinnati, and since 2017 has been the city manager of the city of Centerville, managing a $55 million budget. During his career, Wayne has been very active in professional organizations, having served as president of the Ohio City-County Management Association and a member of the International City-County Management Association. Locally, he previously served as chair of the Greater Cincinnati Government Finance Officers Association and as an active member of the Centerville Rotary Club. Wayne has taught and presented across the country on topics including high-performance work culture, performance measurement and benchmarking, and strategic planning. Any of you who are from this area, if you drive through Centerville these days, I think the city is doing work on almost every piece of property that they own. You probably noticed out here when you walked in the door that they're making improvements to the driving range over here where I spend a large part of my time. They have a Benham's Grove facility that they're planning for larger events in the future, and road work, things like that. Centerville, like most of the communities in this area, is a very well-managed and well-run community. We're blessed in this area to have wonderful elected officials and also very competent and qualified city managers and other administrators. So it's my pleasure to introduce Wayne Davis.
But even tougher is following Mayor Duncan. So now we're here to give you the real story as opposed to the other story. No, not at all. Mayor Duncan talked about a couple of things that are in part of my presentation this morning, but he talked about the Sheets litigation that we're facing, and we had a 2-hour it went into 2:30 in the morning. We held our meeting at Sinclair Community College, the Centerville campus, just because we anticipated there was going to be a lot of public input, and there was. So I think we actually hold the record now, but nonetheless, it's not really a record that I think you really want to set out to try to complete or eclipse. There we go. Had to throw that in for the week. In your own communities, just kind of keep it to roughly 2 hours, and I think keep the controversial issues down. But Mayor Duncan, as a seasoned mayor who does a fantastic work for Oakwood and for the region, really hit the spot when he said, what's going to be my response on that? It's pending litigation. I can't comment on it. And this is being recorded. So Mayor Duncan also talked about love, and he said, why do we do this? We get into it because we love our community, we love our neighbors, and then really touched on it when he talked about what David McCullough talked about. That was inspiring for me, just to hear that, is our country going to the dogs? It's always been going to the dogs, but 90% of the people out there really care, are really well-intentioned, they do good things, they raise families, they educate their children along the way, and that's what we're very fortunate to have. So we can't lose sight of that, even if we believe or we don't believe that our country is going to the dogs. But why we do it because of love. It would be foolish to think about doing it for any other reason, because when you get in the hot seat, when you get elected, That's when things get pretty thick, regardless of the issue, whether it's a large-scale issue, whether it's a small-scale issue. People believe that they should have right, whether it's property or whether it's a social issue or concern. They have a right to self-determination and to be able to run their lives. And we can't ever lose sight of that. Mayor Duncan also talked about, I'm basically following off of his outline because he hit it, nailed it with the presentation. He also talked about public records. You got to remember your microphone is always on. Never, ever forget that. And if you're going to send an email from your personal email and it regards city business, there's no such thing as personal email. That's also a public record. And you will hear later on in our agenda people talking about people who are much more well-informed than I am on public records, but just don't forget that. And I type emails to myself, and so when I hit send, they go to myself. Those are not public records, and that's one of the ways for me to get the catharsis that's necessary when we're dealing with a serious issue. It's just not worth it, and people don't really care if you're trying to be humorous or not. It just doesn't matter. Just you're about serving the people and serving the people with integrity. And that's really what it all comes down to. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, or a lot of bit, about what council manager form of government looks like in Centerville, looks like in my experience, hopefully looks like in your community. But what you're elected to do is to run your communities. And you do it through the council manager form of government for most of us in here. There may be some statutory cities, but really we're here to talk about council being the elected body, the policymakers, and then somebody in my position being a professional manager that's brought in to run the day-to-day. And there are dichotomies, sometimes there are controversies when it comes up to that, but hopefully it will be able to shed some light as to what that form or that model looks like. But going into this, what does this reflect? It reflects probably what's taken place in our country over the last 4 years, beginning with the pandemic. And we did our best to make it through the pandemic, and I think for the most part we've been successful. But it really created a divide in the country. And then we had social unrest with the George Floyd murder, and how we dealt with that in our communities. And so these were challenges that we faced over this last 4 years. And then to the right in the orange is Kristen Sinema. And you'll recall that she and Manchin were on the hot seat for passing a piece of legislation about 3 years ago. And the media wanted to find out in their never-ending search for the truth if in fact how she was going to vote, if she was going to vote. So they followed her into the bathroom. That's what democracy has become for us in America on many levels, but nonetheless, at the local level, I think we still do it, and we do it very, very well. Again, Mayor Duncan talked about home rule and what that means to us. And so when we're dealing with the rough times, federally, statewide, and locally in some cases, we locally have the biggest impact, the most immediate impact on the quality of life of those people who reside in our communities, who operate businesses in our communities, and who come to visit our communities. There's the 3 pillars of government as it applies to Centerville. You can insert your own municipal building down in the bottom right-hand corner. Just a quick show of hands, anybody want to talk about the most functional form of government on that slide? Yeah. You know, it's the federal government that we're working with, it's the state government that we're working with, and they are our partners, regardless of how things ultimately end up working. But then local government is where the rubber hits the road for us immediately and in the near term. So we can pass a piece of legislation, that legislation can impact your life the next day. So that's really what it's about when you link up those three different forms of government in this country. And while we may be going to the dogs, we still do great work in this country at all levels. COVID and the George Floyd murder that we talked about earlier, that resulted in a great divide in our community. People that were put into situations where they no longer had the opportunity to socialize, to get to know your neighbors. And this was the reaction that took place with our government buildings. It became militarized, and this is only 4 years ago. And 4 years ago is a long time, but it's also a very short time. And these were pictures that came out when we shut down government to the public. And that's one of those things to think about as we go forward. Are we accessible in our own communities? Because we are the chosen people, whether you're appointed like I am or elected like all of you are, we are the chosen people to make sure that we're protecting and delivering on service, most importantly, delivering on democracy. Anybody know these two? Don't be afraid to, show your age. But where has this gone, in America? And for the life of me, I can't really fully understand why there are not more centrists in America today. And we see somebody take a stance, and if it's not even 100% close to my stance, then we automatically separate and go 180 degrees from each other. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, two of the greatest icons, I think, in our federal democracy, they did not see eye to eye on many issues, but they always took the time to get together, to socialize, to debate, and to work together to pass legislation that would move our country forward. And they did, by and large, great work in making that happen. It doesn't really happen like that today, but again, I think I have hope for the future where some of those centrists will come together and try to improve things. And then we have this generation, and this is not a bad generation whatsoever. It's a generation that's been infected by technology and different ways of going about communicating, right? And this is a form of communication. You got three people sitting on a bench, and I don't think any of them are communicating with each other, or maybe they are just texting each other. It seems like a lot of wasted effort to get to that. But we supplant our opportunity or our ability to be able to socialize, to converse with each other by replacing that with technology. And I think that's one of those things we have to consider as we deal with this age bracket or with this generation. They didn't ask for the iPhone to come in. It came in through the private sector, and social media became one of those things for them. And so they are dealing with it, and we have to deal with it as we go forward as well. I'm guessing they're probably not looking up Section 18, or Article 18, Section 3 of the Ohio Revised Code, just a guess. So what's, in its simplistic form, what's the council manager form of government look like in most of our communities? It's topped off by our citizens, because without our citizens, none of us are here, right? There's not a need for us. Then you have the mayor and city council directly elected through open democratic processes. And then they have the responsibility for hiring a city manager or an administrator to make sure that you have the day-to-day operations taken care of in your community. and there is a focal point for making sure that that happens. They do, city council obviously does that appointment, and then city manager then appoints staff below on the hierarchical chart. So this is what it looks like in Centerville. It's not a model for everybody. It's not a particularly complex model. I think it's very similar to what you'd experience in your own communities, but that will give you an idea of how that works and how we perceive it to actually work. So again, going back to the simplistic version, this is just a little bit more detailed as to how we do it. City charter, that is our constitution. And if you see section 2.01, form of government in Centerville City Charter, we are actually in the process of going through a charter commission review, and maybe we'll put that on the ballot in November of this year. And there's quite a bit of work to be done on that. But section 2.01, the government provided for by this charter shall be known as the council manager form of government. So when Mayor Duncan begins talking about home rule, well, this is in essence what home rule is. It's a charter which lays out the constitutional duties, if you will, at the local level for our communities, for city council and elected officials. Is everybody familiar with your own charter and your own communities? If not, definitely spend some time working on that. But that's our guiding document. In that, it spells out the duties of city council, spells out the duties of the city manager or administrator. So a couple of these that really talk about the form and function of city council. Subject to the direction and supervision of the manager solely through the manager. That's a piece of language that is misinterpreted, misremembered, but the city manager has the responsibility for the direction of all staff, except for themselves, who reports to the city council, except for the clerk of council that's in Centerville. Some places it's the municipal law director that also reports to city council, but that in essence is one of the toughest things for new elected officials to deal with, to understand, because a lot of type A personalities out here, I'm sure, and when you come into this role, you're about delivering on the promises, the commitments that you made on the campaign trail, and you want to get into it right away, and then you find out that local government works at the speed of local government. And in many ways, we're very efficient, but at the same time, we have to open ourselves up under sunshine laws to make sure that we have participation or a venue or a platform for the public to be able to speak and voice their concerns. And so that's one of the reasons why it takes us so long to get through, because we have to have publicized meetings, then we have to open up those meetings to the public, then we have to provide feedback, we have to have debate, we have to have the opportunity for people to weigh in on issues, big, small, and in the middle, all the way around. That's one of the reasons why we operate at the speed of local government. So city council hires the city manager, hires the clerk of council, in some cases the municipal law director. They have direct responsibility for those individuals. Those individuals then, in terms of the city manager, do the hiring of all other staff, and in some cases the firing, but also the direct day-to-day management. And some people in my position as city managers will say, city council, if you want to talk to staff, you talk to staff through me. I don't believe that's the right way. I think that's kind of setting up yourself for failure along the way. But nonetheless, that's certainly one way to interpret how this code works. I generally allow our city council to interact with our staff, and that includes texting, emailing, making phone calls, but never, ever crossing the line of directing a staff member. Because think about it, when your police chief is directed by a council member, and it might conflict with what his supervisor, his or her supervisor directs them to do, and how confusing that would be and how much chaos potentially would ensue from that. So that's one of the things that we always have to think about when it comes to taking on our role, understanding what our role is as an elected body and as a city council. And of course, for the city manager, we have to understand that policy issues belong to the elected officials. Our charter says that I can weigh in and opine on policy issues, but I can't vote. City council is also responsible for the budget. So you might say, well, I don't really have any impact on day-to-day operations as an elected official because that's our city manager's domain. Well, I would say that you do, because the budget is the financial vehicle for implementing policy. So think that through as you begin to really put the budget together. The budget can be very mundane at times, and $1 million here and $500,000 there and 20,000 here, and then here's the revenue side coming in too, and then trying to balance the budget. But you've got to make sure that your budget, your financial plan, is married up to your operational plan. And that's one of the things we'll get into a little bit there. But that essentially, the form of government is spelled out in 2.0, section 2.01 for the city of Centerville. And then what's appointment and qualifications and compensation for the city manager. And again, I think I've really touched on this, that day-to-day operations happen through my office, and I can delegate those. But another thing that's very critical and sometimes is just glossed over in the role of the city manager has to update city council on issues. And you got to do it in a professional way. You got to do it in a regular and routine way. And that's one of the things you have to feel out with your elected officials as to, do you want a lot of communication? Do you want a little communication? What is the balance that works best? But we are paid to be professionals. Part of that is delivering bad news, delivering timely news, delivering good news. And then what form does it actually take? Media relations, Mayor Duncan was talking about. Social media, do you do it via a group text? Do you do it via group email? Do you do it by phone calls? These are things that we really have to figure out. What is the best way for us to operate in our community and certainly be compliant with the law as we do that? Questions, thoughts? I'm sure your charters are similar in scope and I think direction in all of your communities, but please, please, please get familiar with your charter. Yes?
You're going to be ongoing a charter review, which in my city I want them to do.
And where are you from? I'm sorry.
I'm from north of Cincinnati, small city, Mount Healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you create that commission or committee to review the charter, what are some of the stakeholders that you feel you need in order to do that? Okay.
So it's important that you talked about stakeholders, because some people may say we don't need any stakeholders. We're the elected officials. We were elected to oversee that. But again, I think that helps spread ownership and involvement and engagement into the community. So any number, I think you need a property owner, somebody who actually pays taxes, somebody who's in charge or a part of other volunteer committees or commissions, not necessarily for the city. The Chamber of Commerce certainly is a nice go-to group, and I've got to make a plug for the Rotary as a Rotarian. Anybody who is really involved or wants to get involved. And I think diversity is one of the key things that you ought to think about as well. And diversity isn't just racial or ethnic. It's also religious. It's also age related. One of the challenges we have in Centerville is we are one of the oldest communities with the age of our population, and trying to get volunteers who cut across the swath of what our entire population looks like, and we struggle. We struggle with that. So to me, hopefully that gives you some guidance on that.
Can I just add one thing? Yes.
Absolutely.
I live in Miamisburg, and I was part of their charter review commission, and one thing I found extremely helpful when you're thinking about that, our law director was involved. Because there's some of those questions legally you can't change, and that was so helpful to have him part of those meetings. So I don't know if that helps, and also like the assistant city manager. So someone from staff was kind of running the project and would go back and take our input and then bring it back to us, and then the law director would say, no, you can't change that. That's the Constitution of the state or whatever. So that's my two cents.
Thank you, Star, for sharing the practical experience. Any other questions on that? And hopefully that addressed your question. And the other thing to remember is that the Charter Commission goes forward, will make a recommendation, and you don't have to put it on the ballot. You can take bits and pieces of it, or you can replace the whole thing in its entirety, whatever you think as an elected body needs to be done, or you can say, we will punt and we will come back to this in 3 years. But you do have a responsibility. So mission, vision, and values. This is what we do is our mission. Engage in thoughtful government to deliverance of enhanced services. Vision is where we want to go. I don't know that we'll ever attain it. I don't know that you should ever attain your vision, because that means it's not necessarily a vision. It's happening to you currently. So that's one of the things that I think you all ought to give consideration to. And then the last bit is values. What do we value in terms of those people who represent as agents of the city of Centerville? What are the values? What is the type of conduct? What is the way we expect our staff and elected officials to treat members of the community, whether they're residents, whether they're businesses, or whether they're visitors coming to City of Centerville. Very important piece for us. We reflect back on this, I don't know, not every council meeting, but our city council members understand that our mission, vision, and values that they approve are really the heartbeat of how we operate and conduct business. Other important elements, and we talked already about public records. Just make sure you're well aware and attuned of the fact that public records are a very important piece of local democracy. So if we are sending that thing that we think is funny, make sure it's funny, because it will appear to be funny if it makes it to the front page of the newspaper or on the internet. Sunshine laws. We operate all of our meetings, with the exception of executive sessions, which you have essentially 7 items which you can select to go into executive session, whether it's labor relations, whether it's personnel matters, whether it's sale and or purchase of real estate, economic development, and I can't think of the other 2, but those are the guidelines for going into executive session. Outside of that, the business of the city has to be conducted in public and actually publicized public meetings. So the ORC is very clear on that. So are the sunshine laws. And again, I believe this afternoon you'll have an update on that from people who are more well-versed in that than myself. And then Robert's Rules of Order. We operate according to Robert's Rules of Order. They aren't complicated. but they are different if you haven't ever operated with those before. So that's one of the things I think you ought to do as well, to understand Robert's Rules of Order, when motions are needed, when recommendations are needed, when you have to go through the process of a roll call vote. This is all part of how you can run an effective local democracy. So I've got a picture up here of Mark Ott. You can read who Mark Ott is. What it doesn't say about Mark is that he used to be the city manager of Austin, Texas. And then over to the right, there's some artwork there that talks about policy and talks about administration. It's like a T-chart or a T-graph. On one side is policy, that's the elected officials, and then on the other side is the administrative role, and that was Mark's role when he was the city manager of Austin, Texas. He was on the admin side of things. But then he and I were having this conversation at a conference, and then he started drawing. He said, there's times when policy crosses over into administration, and administration crosses over into policy. And he said, you know, I don't think you need to be spending your time looking at it just on the smaller scale. When it becomes larger on either side of that T-chart or T-graph, that's when it becomes a problem. And he used an example. He said that Uber, I don't know, 15 years ago, came to Austin, Texas, and they said, we want to operate this new, whenever Uber was new, it may have been 20 years ago, and they said, sure, you can operate it, but we're gonna put a code on top of you, much like we put on top of our taxi and limousine commission. And they're like, well, we're not taxis. And they're like, we don't care. And they said, well, we do. And so they went back and forth, and finally Uber ultimately sued the city of Austin. They said, it's not the same model. You got to give some consideration to not throwing taxi cab code on top of Uber. I don't know what the settlement was that was ultimately reached, but Uber just said, I'm getting out of town. Austin doesn't want us. It's not time, and we're not going to waste our efforts. There are a lot of other communities that do. And so Mark Ott came back to me and he said, that was an opportunity for me to be much more of a leader, and I should have advised city council more. I should have got more into the policy side of things. And he said, I probably failed in that regard. And, you know, we talked it through, and, you know, he wasn't worried about his future success or anything like that, but he was just using it as an example where you get that line that blurs at times. And so we all have to be mindful of that. City managers have to be mindful that we aren't getting too heavily involved on the policy side, even though we're allowed to by the charter. But at the same time, elected officials need to remain focused on the fact that the day-to-day operations should be left to the manager or administrator. It's a good lesson for me, and hopefully that resonates with you as well. And then ICMA Code of Ethics. The ICMA is the International City County Managers Association. Jay, in his introduction, talked about the Ohio City County Managers Association, of which I'm also a member, of which Jay has been a member as well. But the international is certainly the global reach of city-county management across the globe. It's important that you understand what the ethics are and what are the requirements of a professional city manager. And these are very, very critical things. As the president of the Ohio City County Managers Association, we would sometimes get complaints or citations filed with members, and we'd have to rule as to whether there was actually a violation which took place. And some people would lose their credentials as a result of violations of the Code of Ethics. And so I can't read it from here. I'm gonna have to get out here, but Number 5 and number 6 are two of the most critical. They're all critical as far as I'm concerned, but submit policy proposals to elected officials. Provide them with facts and technical and professional advice about policy options. And collaborate with them in setting goals for the community and the organization. So if that's not happening, you may want to think about that. That's what you should be getting from a professional manager. Number 6, recognize that elected representatives are accountable to their community for the decisions they make. Members are responsible for implementing those decisions. So I can personally say I disagree with what Mr. Honey's doing in Washington Township if I was the administrator. But I can't advertise that. If it was voted for according to the local guidelines, and that's the decision that is made, we are paid to support that decision and carry that out. Don't ever lose sight of that either, because it's very, very important. And hold your managers accountable for getting that accomplished, and making sure that certainly if they're members of ICMA, they are held to those ethical standards. And that's one of the things that keeps us professional. Generally, going back to what Mayor Duncan was talking about, 90% of the managers are really, really good, operate with integrity, but there's that 10% end of the tail, you know, that we have to think about too. So elected officials need to do your job when it comes to that, holding your staff member accountable. One of the ways we do the council manager form of government in the city of Centerville is engaging people in the community. And going back to the Mount Healthy question about a charter commission, we hold open houses. And this is an opportunity for us to hear directly on an issue, on a project that we're working towards, and get people in front of us and develop the dialogue as to what the city should be doing. Doesn't mean that city council is giving up their ultimate authority. They're actually taking information in, applying it to the equation that we're trying to solve at this point in time, and then using that as they weigh their decision for going forward with projects or issues that are impacting the community. Anytime you get the opportunity to engage the citizens, that's what local democracy is supposed to be about. So the communications piece, if you're not getting the communications you need, talk to your administrator, talk to your manager about the need for communication. This is one thing that we've implemented, and we actually used it in Montgomery when I was down in Montgomery. To the consternation of some of our staff, because we have to put together these memos on any requested legislative movement that we're asking city council, be it an ordinance, be it a resolution. So we say, we want you to provide background on that, connect it up to our strategic plan, then provide an introduction, background, and then a recommendation for every piece of legislation that you're going forward with. And they're like, well, that's a lot of work. And I said, well, the work that we do, we're compensated handsomely for it. The work that our elected officials do, this is a part-time job for most of them. We've got to make sure that they've got something that they can decipher in a fairly efficient manner, get the gist of what the issue is that we deal with on a daily basis. They deal with it on maybe a monthly or semi-monthly basis. So we've got to make sure that we're communicating to our elected officials, much like the ICMA ethics number 5 talked about. This is what legislation looks like in the city of Centerville, probably not much different, but you go from the memo to having city council consider it at a public meeting, and then out of that is birthed legislation that will be in place until it's actually amended or removed. The strategic plan that I talked about, that's one thing when I came aboard in Centerville that City Council said we want to operate by a strategic plan. So we went about the business of putting together a 5-year strategic plan. It had 6 goals in it. We have since completed that. It did not sit on the shelf, I can assure you. We got 97% of the 2018 through 2023 strategic plan completed. We also connected that operational plan at the hip with our 5-year budget. So now we've got a 5-year financial plan that works in sync with our operational plan as outlined in our strategic plan. So in 2023 through 2028, we've just started our first year of that plan. And our focal points are going to be service delivery and stewardship. That's our first goal area. Quality of life, second. Development, third. And then workforce is our fourth goal area. And I anticipate that we will be working to 97% or somewhere near that mark completion over the next 4 years to be able to make sure that we achieve City Council's vision for the city of Centerville. Communication, can't say it enough. Those are like the 2 biggest things in any organization that people talk about: communication and trust. So you've got to make sure everything you're doing is aimed at successful communication and comprehensive communication, and doing that in a timely manner, because even if we do those memos, but it's 3 months after the fact, that those memos aren't any good. So we've got to make sure that we are working to communicate with our elected officials, and then we've got to make sure that we have trust in place between our elected officials and our staff. And those are things you just have to work on daily. Another form of communication is probably not a lot different than you all do in your communities, but this is our Friday report. We do it every Friday, thus the name. But recognizing that elected officials aren't doing this on a daily basis, and again, they might be doing it once a month or twice a month. So this is our opportunity to, tout the work that we're doing, but also to inform City Council in a fairly easy to read, easy to look at platform, so they can get a gist of what is taking place at the city. Because again, there are different ways to communicate: social media, cell phones, texting, whatever you want to do. We have plenty of opportunities, but yet I think just having some place to encapsulate the work that's taken place in the last week, and then the work that's upcoming, I think this is a great place for it. City Council feels the same.
Question.
Yes?
Does that report go out to the public, or just to council members?
It does not go out to the public, but it's a public record, right? We send it to, when I first came to Centerville in 2017, this was a password protected report. And I was like, well, how do I get access to this? And they're like, well, you got to remember your password, dummy. And I said, well, how about like the rest of the people? How are they going to get a hold of it? And they're like, well, they don't need it. And I said, well, I disagree. I believe that they need it. So we got rid of the password. I don't know how that was done, but you saw me with technology. But then we send it out to our volunteers, our boards and commission, our elected officials, and to all of our staff members. And we track on that, what is the open rate on that, and I think we're somewhere around 60% on the open rate. Part of it is also, challenge to staff. They're saying, we didn't know this was going on. I said, did you read your Friday report? Well, no, I didn't. Okay, well, we spend time doing that so you can get information. So it's been a little bit of a change in terms of sharing information. That address your question, sir? Yes. So one of the other things that we're doing that came out of our first strategic plan was lean process improvement. Lean process improvement is a process to eliminate redundancy, to eliminate waste. And it started out being used in manufacturing environments, and when I was down in Montgomery, we put in lean process improvement in place for some of our public sector processes, and this was one of the things we also have implemented or brought to the city of Centerville, because we all have processes that we're frustrated with, that make our life living hell, and we don't do anything about it except for complain. Well, lean process improvement is an opportunity to clean up some of those processes. One that we're working on this year that I think is going to make people's lives so much better is the payroll process. And I would guess that in your communities, payroll is one of the challenges too, because it's always a challenge because people don't really address it. And so we're spending the time. You have to invest a lot of time to get to that point, but you make those improvements, and then you look at, from a metric standpoint, are we better off as a result of the improvements that we've made? And so you can see the other items or issues that we've addressed. The third bullet down there, city council efficiency. We actually track our metrics on city council, and that's kind of between a rock and a hard place, because you're supposed to be there meeting for the public, but is there value in just carrying on longer meetings? And Centerville has been known for its history of long meetings. If you're doing the public's work, then I say meet till 2 o'clock in the morning. If you can do it more efficiently with some of the ways that you deliver your service and still be available to the public, I'm all for that as well. So we've been working on that. We've been working on our major site plan process, internal plan review, so that we can be more customer friendly, making sure that records and access to information is made available electronically. So these are things that came out of the lean process. And then last but not least, this goes back, it all comes back to Mayor Duncan all the time. So he talked about love for the community, and that's really what this slide talks about. You didn't do this for the pay, you didn't do it for the power, you did it because you love your community, you love your neighbors, and you want to see this community that you've lived in for maybe a short period of time, maybe a long period of time, be nothing but successful, which ultimately contributes to the region's success, to the state of Ohio's success, and to America's success. So congratulations to all of you for taking that step forward and committing yourselves and making that happen. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Writing letters. What are the reasons that it could not be published to the residents, citizens?
What are the reasons that it could not be?
Yes, it's informational, it's what's going on in the region, it's employee of the month, it's a new payroll system that's coming on. Why could the public not be told that stuff?
I don't think you can. So that's why we share it.
You share it to the citizens of Centerville.
We share it to our volunteers. We don't have to distribute it to everybody, but we certainly wouldn't have any problem with doing that. One of the problems is the bandwidth, having the ability to send that out from a budgetary standpoint. We don't have everybody's email in Centerville, but we can put it on our website, and that's what we do. But no, my argument would be that's information. It's a public record. We should make that available to as many people who want to see it as possible.
In Oakwood, we get a weekly newsletter that goes to council also, but we also share that with the media. So the Daily News gets our city manager weekly newsletter. Ours isn't as pretty as Centerville's, but it's more like bullet points as to what council needs to know for the week. In the old days, the police used to come to my home and
Yes.
give me my packet. And so when my son was in high school every Friday night, you know, the neighbors keep peering out the window going, what's going on at the Duncan house? You know?
Again, right? Yeah, you used to hand deliver, you know, a paper copy. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Yes, Mount Healthy.
When you were talking about making sure that as a city manager, you respect the policy that has been passed by city council, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, city council want to defer to the manager to make that decision, so they don't have to make the tough decision. Or because we want you to do most of that decision-making process, whereby sometimes our city manager has to say, this is a city council meeting. I provide you the information, I provide you the facts, I provide you any kind of legal direction, but in essence, it's your decision as elected officials.
I think that's fair, and I think it's a good point to bring up, and that's why I flip back to this memo. And so we always put a recommendation in there, even if our recommendation is not to make a recommendation, you know. But that gives city council a pivot point, and we engage in the conversation or the dialogue surrounding the issue. And ultimately, they may say, you know, Mr. Davis, what is your position on this? And I may say, I don't have a position. Or I may say, I think we ought to get Uber to come into Centerville. And bless you. And so really, I mean, if you're asked by your city council, I think you owe it to them to provide a full explanation that's consistent with the ICMA ethical guidelines.
So the communication, obviously what you're stressing is that there has to be really effective communication between the city manager and the city council people, so that ultimately when policy is determined and the elected official, if the city council passes that they make the best decision because of the communication between the two.
Correct. Yeah, that's just the ongoing dialogue, and these things just pop up. They're even if you have a well thought out strategic plan in place, you're not going to cover everything. You're not, you know, what do you do about the pandemic? I wasn't planning for the pandemic happening. I'm pretty sure nobody else was. But those are things that you work towards, and then you do the research and you provide city council with information in a timely manner that is based on factual information. You know, and if I'm going to opine in that memo, I'm going to say, this is my opinion, or personally, this is how I feel about this issue. But the facts say otherwise. So that's that comprehensive, accurate, timely communication. Yes? Yes, sir.
Tom Hank, City of Madera, Ohio. First, thank you very much for the presentation. Excellent material. I appreciate it.
You got a pretty tough road to hoe with your city manager down there, so. Mike Norton Smith is a former Centerville employee. He's a great man.
Who do you feel owns that? Is it coming on the council to kind of own that lean mindset efficiency, or is it on the city manager to own it?
I think it's really a city manager's responsibility, because most of that is day-to-day stuff. But I think you let keep city council informed as to what you're doing, including the efficiencies that you build into the process. Mike Norton Smith did the work for us. He kind of led the charge for that. So don't let him escape and say, we can't do it in Madeira, you know. And now our development director, Eric Collins, who replaced Mike, is actually doing that work. But to get to your question, Tom, I think it's really let staff run with it, but it can be directed by city council, you know. But city council probably doesn't fully embrace, you know, what the challenges are, because you don't do it on a daily basis. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.